They know what it is, and they want it to be audited. By the way, Barack Obama, Mitt Romney will tax a waitress and audit a waitress to make sure she's paying taxes on her tip money. But they won't audit the Federal Reserve. And when Ron Paul insisted that we have this audit, and many of you know the story, if you don't, I'll tell you, he's been pushing this for years, saying we need some transparency here, we need to see who we're giving money to and how much. We need to know that. Let's go, come on. So when he pushed this idea, finally, Congress, pressured by the American people who were catching on, finally passed a version of it, but it was a partial audit, and it had all kinds of strings attached, and it went to the Senate. This partial audit revealed, pulled back the curtain, gave us a little look, and most of you know what it found, that the Federal Reserve had created in new money, in loans. Ron Paul describes it. He says, the Federal Reserve, this is the language he uses, the Federal Reserve spends more money than the United States Congress. Now all of this is semantics. As you know, they don't actually print money, it's electronic, it's buying back bonds, you know what it is. It's very hard to explain what's going on. But basically, the Federal Reserve, meeting in secret, thinking that it would always be secret, but it was exposed, in 2008, created new money, which it loaned to itself mostly, to the banks represented by the board members, which one senator objected to as a conflict of interest. $7 trillion went to other banks outside the United States, including quite a bit to Korea, which was a surprise to everybody, but of course to British banks and to German banks and to French banks, but the big surprise for many was Korea. And several $100 million to the corporation General Electric, and several $100 million to the corporation McDonald's. Interesting. And you can Google and look up all about these audits. They're very, very interesting. But what was the total amount that was created and loaned out? $16 trillion. And you have to stop and just go back in your mind and remember Glenn Beck, and he's got a new show on Fox. And he's got these great big, in the studio, these great big charts, and he's showing you how huge the national debt is. And he's comparing it to other things, and he's comparing it to history. And as he walks through these giant charts to show you, unbelievable, the size of our national debt and how it's a drain on our economy. Just keep in mind that in 1 year, the Federal Reserve created more than our entire accumulated national debt, a lifetime of this country. Now, where did that money come from? It came out of your pocket. Because when you create trillions of new dollars that didn't previously exist, you dilute the value of everybody's dollar. The poor people don't get much attention today. Everybody talks about the middle class. People don't care about the poor, it seems like today. Even the ones that you'd think would care about the poor. They say, well, they don't pay taxes. That's half the country doesn't pay taxes almost. So, and as Ron Paul says, when they criticize, you know, he's got a great line there, I love that. They'll say, what do you think about this? And half the country aren't even paying taxes. And Ron Paul says, well, I think we're halfway there. Think for just a minute how the poor are hurt by this. They don't know they're hurt by this. You know, they're given their money from the government. Here's your money, here's your food stamps, here's your whatever. They don't realize that that money is shrinking, that they're actually paying taxes. Because in a way, that's why Ron Paul, sometimes you'll hear him in the debates, and you may not know what he's talking about, and he'll say, spending is a tax. When the government spends money, they're taxed. And people say, huh? But that's what he's talking about. Because if the government spends the money, even if they don't raise the tax, they get the money somewhere. They print it or borrow it from themselves. Therefore, they dilute the money you have. So you can have a president, and we've had one recently, who gets in power and never raises your taxes at all, but spends another $1 trillion on a little war here, and he has diluted the value of the dollar that's in your pocket. It's just like he's reached in there and torn off a piece of that dollar bill. You've been taxed. You've been taxed, and you didn't even feel it or didn't even know it, didn't vote for it, and he didn't even get in political trouble for it. This is how insidious this monetary system has become. And if it happened in a way where a lot of people were getting rich and they were building hotels and building new casinos and building new empires, and they were having their trillions of dollars and paying themselves their billions in salaries, and it didn't touch us, well, it might not have mattered. But it's touched you. It's touched me. We've lost our jobs. We've lost the value of our homes. The home was the one ticket into middle class. It was the one way you could become middle class. You could buy a home, put your money in there, stick with it, stay with it, and you could eventually retire and live a nice life in a nice home. Not anymore. They've come and gotten that too. It's pretty amazing what has happened. Pretty discouraging what has happened. But Ron Paul keeps giving us hope. And the hope is, here's the hope. We're catching on. That's the hope. It doesn't mean that corruption will end, but it may mean that we'll force them to find another way. We may be forcing them to move somewhere else and do it another way and reclaim a little bit. Now this is interesting. When people say, why do young people support Ron Paul? Students are paying 6%, 8%, 12%, 16%, 18% interest on student loans. And here's these banks getting billions of dollars in 0% interest loans. That's why a lot of young people all over the country are just a little bit upset with what's going on. And then, in the midst of all of this, here comes this country doctor from Texas to Washington. I mean, you couldn't make this story up. If they made a movie on his life, it would be a character that's unbelievable. He comes to Washington, he won't take a bribe, he won't sit down with the lobbyists, he won't touch their money, he votes his conscience. He won't participate in the pension plan because the ordinary citizen wouldn't get a pension like that. How can I take one as a congressman? He gives back $100,000, some years more, of his congressional allowance back to the U.S. Treasury. He never goes on a congressional junket to Hawaii or to Europe or to South America with all the other congressmen and their wives. He never votes for a tax increase, never votes for an unbalanced budget. You can't make this stuff up. He's incorruptible. I described him to Andrea Mitchell as a clean boat in a sea of garbage. There's nobody like Ron Paul. I couldn't be like him. I ran for Congress once. I know when I got there, I know I would have become corrupted by it. Sorry, I'd like to think I wouldn't. But he is one of the most unusual men that I've ever met. And he's a man that we need right now. We need someone that's incorruptible. And you can look at his debating style, criticize the campaign, and criticize some of the things, decisions that are made. I can just tell you this, I've been a part of 7 presidential campaigns. I sleep better working for Ron Paul than any person I've ever worked for. Because he's honest. And you know, there is a pride, there's a pride of authorship about all of this. This is just my theory, and I'll give it to you. People ask, why are people so devoted to Ron Paul? Why are they so committed to Ron Paul? And this is my theory again. He's not the great communicator, but he is the great provocateur. He provokes people. He says things. Like when I heard him say a couple of years ago at a banquet, I heard him get up and say, the Federal Reserve spends more money than Congress does. I said to myself, huh? What's he talking about? I mean, we know Congress, how important it is, and all the money that's invested, and the time that's invested, they have elections, it's on television, all this is going on. I don't even know who's on the Federal Reserve. Do they spend more money than Congress? It provoked me. And what happens is, he provokes people, he drives them to the internet where they learn for themselves. And then they have pride of authorship. It's their idea. Pride of discovery. It's not just spoon-fed to them. And I think that's part of the secret to this phenomena here tonight. There are people here tonight who are brilliant on these issues, and you can pull them aside, and if you'll humble yourself, as I have done in many of these events, pull somebody aside and say, talk to me, tell me about the Federal Reserve, tell me about it. They'll tell you because they've studied it. And it's why they're so committed to the cause. Oh, I got to tell you, this is fun. I know people are recording, so it's me end up on YouTube, so I got to be very careful. I was recently on a television show at a major network, and it was late at night, and I was doing a remote. So I was going to do the remote, and they would have me on a show in another city, like maybe New York, maybe. So anyway, the makeup lady had to stay late to do my makeup for this remote at the studio where I was. So she's putting my makeup on, we get to talking, and Obama comes on, and he's saying something about jobs or this wage or that wage. And I looked at her and she looked at me, and I said, just now, I said, since I've been working for Ron Paul, all of this stuff is just a disconnect. It's like they're talking about these little things when you've got these giant things. It's out of context. And she said, it's that way with everybody. I said, really? Is that way to you too? She said, yes. She said, it's like the emperor's clothes. She says, people all over the country know what's going on, and they listen to these politicians, and they listen to these pundits on TV, and they can tell when one of them doesn't know what's going on. They can tell the way they're talking. And it's like in the story of the emperor's clothes. They're naked, and the whole country can see they're naked. So it's a case where the public has leaped ahead of the news media on many of these issues, and the politicians. So when they come out with some of their rote statements that used to make people jump or hop or vote a certain way, it doesn't work with some people. And then she went over to the door and she closed the door. And she started talking to me about, she said, you know, this company is owned by this company, and this company, and this company, and they get their loans from the Federal Reserve. Did you know that? I said, no, are you sure about that? She said, I'm absolutely sure about that. She said, I'll give you can Google this information and find it yourself. I said, well, that would explain why we don't get much time on the debates. She said, yeah. I said, well, how do you know all this? She said, I listen. So, there's the makeup lady. You gotta be careful. You gotta be careful what you say. The makeup lady is listening. It just cracks me up. Your car mechanic knows some of this. You may not have wandered in here tonight. Some of this may be new to you. Most of it won't be. Some will be vaguely familiar. Some of you know a whole lot more